Thank you, and Sir Howard does send his apologies, but I've made a career out of making speeches that start with the words, "I'm apologising for not being Sir Howard Bernstein." So today is no real exception to a long and established tradition. I don't know, Howard was keen to be here, and as has been said, he's been somewhat distracted by the rather intense visit by the Chinese delegation this week, but hopefully that will bring some significant rewards for both the City of Manchester and the Northern Powerhouse itself. So I'm delighted to be invited to give the keynote speech on Howard's behalf. The conference topic is very timely. It's one which is very much in the forefront of all our thinking, whether we have a public or private sector background. From Manchester, we're particularly interested in optimising the abilities of cities to become engines of growth. And this means articulating clearly the challenges that we face and then removing the barriers which stand in the way. This lies at the heart of rebalancing the economy, and one in which devolution has a critical role to play. So if I may, I'd like to use the opportunity to bring a place perspective to some of the themes that you've been grappling with today, and look at these through the lens of Greater Manchester's devolution story. Before I do that, I'd like to set out briefly some of the activity which we're undertaking across Manchester and the city region on the smart city agenda. For us, the challenge around smart cities is how we derive long-lasting place-based benefits for people who live and the businesses that are located within the city and city region. This will help contribute significantly towards the reform and growth agendas which we so desperately need to deliver within our cities. And with this in mind, we need to get to a place where we develop far greater depth to our collaborative work, where risks and rewards are shared equitably between public and private sectors. Such an approach has been at the core of our successful EU-funded Lighthouse project, known as Triangulum, where the City Council, Siemens, 2 of our universities and a number of SMEs are working to create a flagship smart city district in the Manchester corridor, which is the area of the city where the universities and the teaching hospitals are located. It's aiming to reduce and optimise energy across a number of buildings and assets within a new ICT framework. And we're seeking to build on the work that we've done through Triangulum in our approach to the Internet of Things, where we've been invited through to the second round of the competition by BIS. This approach lies at the core of our work with China, where we're bringing together public, private and academic institutions both within the UK and China to develop a range of projects around citizen engagement, air quality sensing and transport. I think it's important that we understand where we sit in the context of the global economy, because that's the context within which our cities need to align and our businesses need to operate within. Globalisation brings with it its own unique set of challenges and opportunities to Britain's abilities to compete effectively, and the ever-increasing intensity of competition within global markets is a major challenge facing business. Whilst new markets are opening up and becoming ever more integrated, the pace of change is accelerating at a rapid rate, with new technologies reducing the distance between markets. And this complex set of factors, coupled with the new threat from businesses within emerging economies such as China and India, is increasing and intensifying competition. Our survival will rely on producing and delivering better value, and ability to differentiate from the competition, building on our specific strengths and assets, will improve survival and growth prospects. This overall picture is reflected within the smart city market, where the global market in 2013 was estimated to be in the region of 400 billion by 2020. And given the UK's specific strengths in professional disciplines such as finance, design and engineering, it could be expected to capture a 10% share of this figure. Its strong reputational brand, particularly within the larger Asian economies of China and India, provides a real chance of attaining over and above that market share. However, we have to increasingly look towards our cities to achieve this growth, with national governments providing an enabling framework around which our cities can prosper and businesses flourish. I'd like to say a little bit about our view of how we can turn cities into engines of growth, and this is really at the heart of the story of devolution. It's our clear view that devolving powers to cities can help in 2 ways. Firstly, in terms of coordinating the amount of reducing the amount of duplication in the system by better coordinating the different parts of the public sector, and secondly, can allow cities to tailor policy and prioritise resources to more effectively prioritise the challenges that we face. For those of you who aren't aware of the political and physical geography of Manchester, GM is made up of 10 local authority areas which collectively have a combined population of 2.8 million, generating over 50 billion in GVA. The 10 districts have worked very closely for over 25 years, feels like longer than that sometimes, based around the understanding that Greater Manchester is a single economy with a single labour market. And while we've been working collectively for some time, it's perhaps only recently that we've captured the headlines based on our work leading the way in devolution and for our role at the heart of the Northern Powerhouse. But that's part of a long-term story. The step change in the Greater Manchester story came when our political leaders took the brave move of commissioning an independent review of the economy, led by Jim O'Neill, now Lord O'Neill, to take a cold, hard look at our economic prospects as a city region. I remember that well. I've commissioned many a report, independent report from independent consultants, when I've got them in and said, write me an independent report, the conclusion of which is this. I think we didn't do that this time round. We actually said, we want to know, rough edges and all, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what do we need to do? And the report broke new ground by bringing world-leading economists and academics into a place and to consider our economic strengths and frailties in the round. They told us we had the potential for growth at a higher level anywhere outside London and the South East, but also that we had a critical problem in respect of productivity that was an economic drag. Our response was the publication of the Greater Manchester Strategy, which provided the case for investing in economic growth through jobs, housing and infrastructure, and at the same time investing in our people, getting more of them into work, addressing poor health and addressing the skills the gaps in the city region so that they aligned with the requirements of the labour market for the future. And we knew then that we needed more tools to deliver this, and the massively centralised system of government and decision-making in the UK needed to change to allow us to achieve our potential, something good, that was good not only for Manchester, but for the UK as a whole. And so we continued the quest for the tools and resources we needed to deliver this ambitious agenda, and in parallel strengthen our leadership and decision-making capacity across the city region. We established the first combined authority, which we told government was not a blueprint. Of course, it's now a blueprint, and it's been applied everywhere. It's a much copied model. But it gave us a platform to focus our collective resources at those things that would generate the best returns for the economy. And it meant that political leaders had to learn to act beyond their own authorities and take difficult decisions collectively. Importantly, we moved from a place that was dependent on grant to one that was promoting an investment model, where we invested public resources from national and European and local sources in projects that would give us a return and allow us to invest again. And that's an important principle that we've applied to our economic growth agenda over the last decade. But we saw that we needed to go further. We recognised that government's deficit reduction plans were simply not working. Our analysis showed that in 2008-09, public spending across GM was around 22 billion. This covered all public expenditure, including investment in infrastructure and benefits. But in 2012-13, after several years of public spending cuts, that figure was still £22 billion. Local government was spending less, infrastructure providers were spending less, the police were spending less, health was spending the same, and the welfare benefits bill had rocketed. So there was a real issue for us where we could see that cuts in one area was creating pressures somewhere else, and a new model of public service was needed. And we knew that the tax mismatch raised in Greater Manchester was about £4 to £5 billion less than the level of public spending. And that's mirrored across most of our northern cities, and GM has set itself the ambition to become self-sustaining as a city region, which I think is a bold and brave position to adopt. If we were going to do this, we needed more control over more local control over public services to get more people into work and off benefits and reduce the number of people suffering with poor health and low skills, often the same people afflicted by all of those factors. It needed a step change in the siloed way that public services have been delivered, but to do this and drive our economic growth, we needed more levers and greater leadership capacity. The devolution agenda feels well established. In fact, the first devolution deal was only signed 11 months ago, and it set out a radical agenda for change, devolving major powers and resources, and setting new leadership arrangements for GM through a mayor. It's worth saying that the model was one we designed ourselves. Many people had said what Manchester needs is a Boris, and no disrespect to Boris. What we didn't need was a mayoral structure of the sort that has been created in the GLA. What we wanted was a mayoral structure where the mayor was effectively the chair of a cabinet, where the local authorities and the mayor would work collaboratively to deliver growth rather than work in opposition to each other, as has often been the case in two-tier systems. So it is a very different model than the London model. This is not the end of the story. We've quickly moved to create our model for integrating health and social care at GM level. Last September, we said to George Osborne, we think we want greater control over health and social care. In February, he pitched up in Manchester and said, there's £6.8 billion being spent on health and social care in Greater Manchester. You manage it, which is really quite a remarkable step, described by some as the biggest hospital pass in the history of public service, but quite an enormous step for us to take and a daunting challenge, but one that we believe that we need to undertake, A, if we're going to avoid public services, including health going bust, but also because we believe by integrating and focusing on prevention, we can deliver much better outcomes for our people. We've still got further to go, and there will be moves for further devolution. You'd be surprised to hear that we're currently in negotiation with Treasury over further devolution of powers. And as you know, other cities are following suit. Sheffield have recently announced their devolution deal. Tyne and Wear in the northeast, the Tees Valley, have also announced theirs, and progress is being made in other places. And we'll continue to press for greater rebalancing of power, and at the same time grow our capacity for leadership and delivery, because we believe that's fundamentally how we can help to improve the productivity of UK PLC overall. And then finally, to return to the macro level, Greater Manchester is still small on the global stage. But we need to look beyond the city and across the north for the long-term economic success that we need. And that's why during his recent visit to China, the Chancellor and the leaders of the northern cities set out an agenda promoting collaboration and the potential of the northern cities to be an economic area of global significance. If you look at the GVA output of the northern powerhouse area, it's one of the top 25 economic entities in the world. And we need to realise the potential of that and exploit it, not to rebalance the economy, but to create the capability for UK PLC to grow in a balanced and sustainable way. Transport for the north will connect the cities and ports in a way that reshapes the economic geography of the north, bringing Leeds, Sheffield and Manchester within 30 minutes of each other. And cities and leaders are grabbing this opportunity and shaping a clear narrative for our growth potential. Government needs to step up, directing its policies and investment to unblocking the barriers to growth. We've come a long way, but there is much to do. This has not been a story about a grab for power, but one about fundamentally reshaping the relationship between central government and local places. I hope you enjoy the rest of today's event, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that very interesting speech. We will now have an opportunity for a few minutes of questions and answers. So I'm sure quite a lot of people have questions. Who wants to go first? And if nobody does, I will. Oh, gentleman over there, please. If you don't mind telling us who you are, which organisation you work for. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Richard Fagg from Bouygues Development. Eamon, you mentioned difficult decisions. Could you give an example of where you've had to make a difficult decision in the best interests of the city and the GM wider area rather than your own interests?
Well, I think just to look at the way in which we are recasting our approach to economic development. Time was in the past where 10 boroughs or 10 authorities sitting together would look at an economic development strategy and they'd agree that there were priority areas for investment, and amazingly enough, there were always 10 of them. And amazingly enough, there was always at least one in each of the districts. We've turned away from that completely, and leaders have turned away from that and recognised the fact that actually we have an interdependent economic entity, not one that actually is made up of 10 autonomous areas. So we have a much more market-facing approach now to the way in which we're trying to bring investment forward. And I think that's much more realistic. Many of us have sat there looking at strategic employment sites that have been strategic employment sites for as long as anybody can remember. And not a job has been created on them. And there's an obvious reason for that. And so we're trying to move very far away from that. And equally, as we look to the challenge of how we accommodate growth going forward, we know that we will need to create something over 200,000 homes in the next 20 years, at least, in order to accommodate our known growth. We'll need to take some tough decisions about where those homes go. And that's something that the leaders and the mayor have determined we will do collectively rather than piecemeal. So those are just a couple of examples of where. Yeah.
Thank you. Gentleman over there, if you could tell us who you are. Just wait for the microphone.
Rory Bergen, HTA Design. Does your negotiations with the Treasury include the raising of local taxation to help you to invest?
I think it's fair to say that the story of devolution thus far has been one of functional rather than fiscal devolution, and that remains the case. Although it's very clear that the government are starting to move toward a position where there will be greater autonomy for local places, although it's interesting the announcement on business rates gives me the power to reduce them rather than do anything else with them, which I'm sure has come as a great reassurance to the business community. Actually, it's probably what we would do anyway in order to accommodate growth. So we are still away from a genuine fiscal devolution. I think that's just the truth of where we are. As far as we're concerned, we're on a journey and we want to continue that debate and develop that with government, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. Gentleman over there, please.
Thank you. Chris Henning, Nottingham City Council. As you'll be aware, in Nottingham, we look on the Manchester story with great envy, but also as a kind of beating a path for other local authorities in the devolution deal stakes. What I would like to ask, though, you talked about the potential hospital pass on the health and social care agenda. To what extent is Greater Manchester fighting the battle around principles, winning that principle and then working out the detail later, or do you go into those negotiations with a really clear understanding of where the benefits and costs will fall once the deal is done?
Well, you'll be surprised to hear it's more the former than the latter. Although we always like to tell a good story that makes it sound like we know what we're talking about when we start. But the reality is, I mean, health and social care being a case in point, we have a £6.8 billion economy across the 10 authorities. Our estimate is a do-nothing scenario will result in a £2 billion per annum deficit in that budget by 2020. So there is an enormous challenge for us to meet, which we will only meet by working with NHS colleagues to fundamentally rebalance the way in which health services and social care services are delivered. So we're spending far less on very expensive acute settings for people and more on preventative, community-based and home-based service. It's an enormous challenge, and it's not without very, very significant risk. Are we working that through now, having had agreement about the principle first? Yes, that's the order in which we have to do that kind of thing.
Thank you. Lady over there, please, if you could remind us, the microphone's just there. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that speech, very insightful. It's Jen Horse-Hewitt from Accenture. I just wanted to pick up on the discussion about austerity, productivity gains, cost saving, because I think a lot of the conversation around smart cities, it feels like it's quite a shiny, technology-driven, quite an expense to local authorities. And I'm interested to see that Manchester are sort of looking at technology as an enabler for savings. And I guess I'd just be curious to understand if there's any concrete examples already from Manchester in terms of how technology is helping to save the council money.
Well, the triangular work is a clear example at a relatively small scale where we're using technology in not a revolutionary way, a way that many others are to improve the intelligent management of buildings, to improve their performance and such like, and therefore reduce cost. On the health and social care agenda, the use of technology in telehealth will be absolutely fundamental to our ability to deliver our outcomes. And a real focus for our approach to the Internet of Things and the bid that we put forward is about how can we use that to improve our intelligence, to enable people to remain in their homes, rather than push cost into the health and social care system. So we are trying to address both sides. And if you look at the agenda that's been set out in the GM strategy, it's absolutely unashamedly about sustainable economic growth, but it's also fundamentally about how we can use public expenditure not to deliver services to needy people, but to promote the independence of people. And I think we need to use public investment, we need to use technology exactly I need to do myself out of a traditional public servant's job. And really need to use all of our technology, all of our investment to enable people to live the most independent and fulfilled lives that they can.
Fascinating, thank you. Who's got the next question? Otherwise, I'm going to jump in and ask mine, so you better hurry up. You said something very interesting when you compare, well, everything you said was fascinating, but one point that especially interested me was a distinction you made between the structure of devolution in Manchester and surrounding areas versus London. Do you think, which of those two models do you think is going to gain ground, and how do you think that impacts on, on the future success of devolution?
Well, which of the two models? It may be that neither model gains ground, and in fact, in the East Midlands or the North East, the model is different again. Again, what we've never done in GM is say we have a better way of doing it that can be applied everywhere. There are certainly lessons that can be learned, and I made a joke about the combined authority, and actually I think most places that have adopted that model are finding it beneficial. But the mayoral model that we've adopted is one that really fundamentally suits the circumstances in Manchester, where you have, why are we where we are? We're where we are because we started this collaborative journey in 1984 when Margaret Thatcher abolished the Greater Manchester Council. So, I often say to colleagues in other sub-regions, it's my old dad, an Irish chap, used to say, if I want to get there, I wouldn't be starting from where you are, which is always, one of those wonderfully helpful pieces of advice. But, an awful lot of city regions are trying to travel from 0 to hero in 20 minutes flat, and actually we've taken a long time. So we've got a model that's evolved, and the approach to the mayoralty is one that fits that evolutionary and collaborative model. And we're not afraid of consensus. Everyone says, oh, consensus politics just leads to fudge. Well, actually, we've gotten to where we've gotten to, which is, I'd say, ahead of any other city in the UK, entirely on the basis of collaboration. Last 25 years, we've had one vote, and that was to agree to have a referendum on congestion charging. And then everyone in Greater Manchester said no to congestion charging. So I think they won't use that voting system again in a hurry. But
that's the problem with votes. You sometimes get the wrong answer, yes. Yes. Great, fascinating. We've got time for one last question, so someone's going to have a question in this room, other than me, of course. Definitely no one? Okay, me then. Oh, perfect, brilliant. Gentleman over there, please.
Hello, Sean Powley from BT. I just wanted to ask about how you are creating and building the capacity within the new Greater Manchester structures to actually do this smarter decision making, to actually govern in a different way, because it's something that I've heard quite a bit today.
Yeah, well, what we've deliberately tried to not do is to create a new bureaucracy and a new superstructure. In reality, what that means is that an awful lot of people are working on several different fronts. So when I have responsibility for running a local authority, I also lead on housing planning and investment for Greater Manchester as a whole. And so we've created a series of actual and virtual teams based on the professional expertise that exists in the city region to try and move that agenda forward. Will that hold as we move forward and as our ambition grows? Probably no, it won't. And we will need to think about how we create new structures. And just an obvious example, if we're moving to an integrated health and social care commissioning and delivery structure at a locality level, can we do that based on existing local authority and NHS bureaucracies? No, we can't. We need to collapse them and actually create something new. But what we're trying to do is not create additional. Because the one thing, and going back to those pesky electors, the one thing that people absolutely are very clear about is they do not want to see us spending more money on bureaucracy management and delivery structures.
Fascinating. Well, thank you very much indeed for coming and for enlightening us in this way. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Thank you.